All right, everybody, it is time. It's time for another episode of All of the Avengers. I'm Van Allen Plexico. I'm your host. And today we're going to talk about Avengers number 15. So, obviously, we have a big watershed moment coming up in the next issue with 16, but it's the second part of the story. I don't know if people fully realize that. We think of issue 16 as the old order changeth story, which it certainly is, but it's part two of a story that actually begins here in Avengers 15, and so we're going to get into Avengers 15 solo, and then I'll have a couple of guests on, I believe, coming up in a couple of weeks for when we get into the old order changeth Avengers number 16. So as I'm bringing up the comic and we're going to look at it, I'll say one thing. I'm now posting the audio for these, 2 or 3 months later as podcasts on the White Rocket podcast, the White Rocket Entertainment Network, the White Rocket podcast. So I'm going to try to do them. I'm going to try to describe things a little better because I've always been, approaching this as a video show or visual show where you could see the comic book pages as my guests and I discuss them. But if we're going to have an audio version of this, it needs to be a little clearer probably. So starting with this issue, now that I know that we're doing it this way, I'll start describing them as we go along a little better as best I can. Remember, to support this show and to keep it going, go to www.avengersassemble.net. That is the great Avengers Assemble website that's been around since 1995. So 27. Wow, 27 years now. It's amazing. Go there and click on the button to become a patron, and you can support the show and get access to the new episodes as they come out, like this one today. And there are certain special episodes that are only available there. There's one where I reviewed several issues of Fantastic Four that related to the Avengers storyline. So, all right, without further ado, and to get me off the screen and get a comic book on the screen, which would be much more appealing, let me go ahead and bring in Avengers number 15. All right. So this is a really great cover. You can tell that, and by the way, it's interesting to see these covers that don't have the barcode yet, right? I mean, as long as I can remember, comics have had a barcode. If they didn't have the little barcode in the bottom corner, they at least had the rectangle where the barcode would have been, but with like a logo or something just to fill in that space, because they had to leave it blank for the issues that did need a barcode there. But these old issues, it's always kind of interesting to see that they don't have that little rectangle. Instead, this one has the rectangle for the MMMS. The MMMS wants you. Of course, that's the Mighty Marvel Marching Society, which was, some of you may have a better detailed way of describing it. I wasn't around really when it was a thing back in the 60s. By the time I really started reading Marvel comics in the mid to late 70s, it had kind of gone away, I guess. But my understanding is it was basically the Marvel Comics fan club, right? It was just like the fan club for people that really liked Marvel. So, okay. So let's look at this issue a little bit. It's the issue before the big famous issue. And a couple of things jump out. Now by my hands shall perish a villain. That's one of those classic, Stan Lee titles, it seems like. But it's also interesting to see what it seems to be alluding to, that they're actually going to kill a villain rather than arrest them or capture them or, hand them over to the authorities or drive them away, into their secret lair again, like with Zemo always, but that they shall flat out kill them. And it seems to carry intent. You know what I mean? That sounds to me like intent. That sounds like, to me, premeditation. Like, now I'm going to kill this person. It doesn't say, oh no, by my hand perished a villain a couple of minutes ago. It says they're about to die by my hand. So that's not usual, and we're going to look at when that actually happens in the story and try to make some sense out of it. So stay tuned for that. It's the thriller you never expected to see, and if that title proves to be true, then I agree. It is a something I never expected to see. We get 3 text boxes on this cover besides the MMMS box. The third one says the world's mightiest superheroes in mortal combat with the world's deadliest villains. And I mean, if there's anything that the Avengers is supposed to be, right? I mean, it's heroes who squabble with each other, living together in a mansion like it's the MTV Real World or something, you know. It's the Avengers are a lot of things, but at the top of that list, in my opinion, the Avengers comic book at the top of the list should always be the world's mightiest superheroes, or of course, Earth's mightiest heroes, in mortal combat with the world's deadliest villains. That, I mean, I think that just sums up the mission statement of the comic series of the book. And we see kind of a conglomeration of all the, or a lot of the masters of evil to this point on the right, and you see the Avengers on the left, and you see Giant Man / Ant-Man / Henry Pym in kind of a new costume. I'm not sure where that came from. I don't remember it in the last issue. Maybe it was, but having this V-shaped tunic and the blue helmet and everything is just that seems new. So, okay. So let's get into it. So now we find out that the actual title of the issue is Now by My Hand Shall Die a Villain, but I'm sure the Comics Code didn't want them, or they were afraid because of the Comics Code, to put die, you know, on the cover. I mean, how many times do we see the word destroy? I shall destroy you. Well, you're trying to kill them. Well, yes, but I'm not going to say I'm going to kill you. I'll say I will destroy you, you know. Another thing that kind of catches my attention here is that Stan seems to be reacting to something he's heard maybe in the letters. I don't know where else he would have heard this feedback. Maybe when he was he already going out to college campuses and giving his speeches at this point? I don't know. I know he did that for a while, but I don't know if he was doing it in, let's see, this is, by the way, I didn't give you the date. This is the April 1965. This is number 15. Yeah, April 1965. So this issue came out again the year of Thunderball, the James Bond movie, and the space program was rolling right along. We were just a little over 4 years away from landing on the moon at this point. Lyndon Johnson has just won re-election for his full term after finishing out Kennedy. So that's kind of what's going on historical wise. Yeah, so it's early 1965 issue, probably written, put together at the end of 64, beginning of 65, over the holidays there. And it is written by Stan Lee, of course, and by that I mean the script. We can argue about who actually wrote it, because Jack argued till the day he died about that. Layouts by Jack Kirby, but again, Jack is probably putting most of his effort at this point into the Fantastic Four and probably a couple of other books too. And so they have Don Heck coming in and doing the finishing pencils, and then Mickey DeMeo doing the inking, and of course good old Artie Simek doing the lettering. And we still are not crediting the colorist. So I have no idea. I've yet to know who colored any of these issues of Avengers. Now, there at the bottom, featuring one of the greatest arrays of guest villains ever assembled in one magazine. And I mean, up until that point, that's probably true. Our splash page has the Avengers gathered around their table. And there's a lot of stuff that you can see George Perez would later pick up on, you know, as machinery and computer screens and electronics and stuff all around them. It's not like a It's not like the living room of the library of some mansion. It is a mansion, but it's much more like a secret headquarters with high tech stuff. It looks more like a James Bond set than it does like the mansion of some rich playboy. At last, it says, Marvel answers those who have claimed the Avengers never wage a fight to the finish. Okay, so people have claimed the Avengers never wage a fight to the finish. This is what I was getting at a minute ago. I haven't noticed that, but this seems to be Stan responding to criticism he's feeling. I would love to know more about this. If Stan were still around today, I'd have 100 questions for him, 1,000 questions for him. But one of my questions for him would be, what were you hearing? What were you being told in terms of the Avengers never wage a fight to the finish? And given the title, that the villain dies, it almost sounds like they're saying people are complaining the Avengers don't kill their enemies, and so this is going to address that, and we're going to kill the bad guy. And that's just kind of strange. It doesn't fit with what they normally do. It seems to me that if somebody came up to Stan Lee and said, why don't the Avengers kill their enemies? Stan's reaction wouldn't be, that's a fair criticism, I'll write a story to change that. It seems like Stan's response would be, that's right, they don't kill their enemies. They are essentially high-tech, overpowered law enforcement, right? I don't think the Avengers are like sworn never to kill necessarily, not most of them, I don't think, but it's not going to be their first option. And with the powers and abilities they have, it usually isn't necessary because they can capture people pretty darn easily. What are you going to do, right? If Iron Man captures you, you're probably not going to get away unless you're really, really powerful. So not quite sure what to do. I guess the whole theme of this issue is a puzzle to me. I know I'm spending a lot of our airtime here on this one question, but that's like the title of the issue. It's on the front cover. It's the title on the splash page, and it just seems incongruous. I'm not sure what to make of it, or why it was an issue, or who was telling Stan that, or why he felt the need to do something different. But we'll see. I've pointed out before that Stan writes the stuff you're reading, but yet he writes it as if it's some omniscient. He writes it like the Watcher is talking about him. Like the Watcher is going to say, lo, now behold this story as chronicled by Stan Lee, one of the greatest writers in comics history, and will give you one of the greatest stories you will cherish forever. And I'm like, but Stan wrote that. The Watcher doesn't actually exist. So we get this this caption that's not supposed to be, I don't think, it's not supposed to come across as being written by the writer, and yet it obviously was. And it says, please, and this is not the first time, I know we've talked about this before, it's just funny. Please read this masterwork. I can't even get past that. I'm not saying it's not a masterwork. I'm not saying it is, but I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying that he's calling it that, and he wrote it. Okay. Please read this masterwork slowly. You will treasure it for years. I'm going to put that on the cover of my next novel. Please read this masterwork slowly. You will treasure it for years. You know, give Stan credit for having the chutzpah, right? To just, he writes a good story, and then he tells you what an incredibly great story it is, and that you will cherish it for the rest of your life and hand it down to your grandchildren. And I'm just like, Stan, what can you do but tip your hat to that? That is just Stan all around. All right, let's get on into it. I feel like I could talk about this whole flash page for another hour, but all right. So Thor, by the way, is the current chairman. They're still doing monthly different chair people. And he uses, at least he does have a hammer, so he doesn't need the gavel. He just bangs Mjolnir on the table and doesn't smash the table, by the way, somehow. And I also have to point out that Rick Jones is there. And I keep asking the question, Why is Rick Jones here? They've gone to great lengths to tell him that, to tell him, yeah. They've gone to great lengths to tell us that he can never be an Avenger because he doesn't have any powers. He's just a kid. And yet there he is, right there at the table, just like every other Avenger. So good for Rick. I just don't understand it. All right. So again, Giant Man is in a different costume. I don't like it. I'm not a big fan. I like that Hank and Jan go out to dinner, and Jan basically, I find this out of character, right? Jan likes to dress up. She's all about showing off her looks and her money. And yet she's just like, I'm too hungry, Hank. Just toss my coat over my shoulders. No one will suspect I'm in costume. Now, we'll say this. Staying in costume under her coat does have one advantage. That's if she has to change into the Wasp on the date, at dinner, at least she won't be naked flying around in a giant coat, because she will have her costume that is, unstable molecules and shrinks with her. So I love that Hank calls her an absolute nut there. There's some irony there. Oh, the irony that Hank Pym is calling Jan an absolute nut. I'm not going to say anything else. I'm just leaving that out there for those that know. Hank's calling Jan an absolute nut. Okay, do with that what you will. All right, here goes Thor changing back into Donald Blake. And, Captain America's got his shield in an artist portfolio. Now, we know that later on, Steve Rogers, one of the things he does or has done is be an artist, which always struck me as odd, but that's fine. Go with it. So my question then is, was he already known to be an artist at this point in his career? I don't know. I've never been a huge Captain America guy. I like movie Captain America better to a large degree than comics Captain America. I've become more of a Captain America fan thanks to Chris Evans, in other words, than I was just before. But I know a good bit about him. I read his issues back in the 70s and early 80s, as well as the Avengers. And I can tell you that at one point he was an artist. So I wonder if this has already been established and this scene is playing on that, or whether they were just trying to think, what could Cap do with his shield? And that's the first time that we see Cap having a connection to art. I don't know. So Iron Man is happy for them to go. And they're wondering, why does he always leave last? Well, it's because he lives there. It's his house, but he doesn't want them to know that. All right. And he puts on this really awesome green and white coat with like an orange tie. And Tony, I mean, there are super villains whose outfits are not that flamboyant, so whatever. Meanwhile, in South America, Baron Zemo is ranting and raving as he steps over and walks on his native servants onto his litter that he's being carried about on. He's just determined this time he's going to really get the Avengers. And so he's got Nazis working for him as well as Native Americans, and he sends the Nazis off in this plane. This right here, and one of his guys, by the way, is talking about it's only a matter of time before the Avengers destroy him or he destroys them. One of all the murderous Nazi war criminals, only Zemo has managed to escape completely. So I'm wondering, is this guy like admiring that or detesting that, or just kind of observing? I don't know. It's not really clear whether this guy is like a double agent or just randomly speculating, and if so, why do we care? Anyway, this is a good part right here. This is something I didn't realize was in this issue. Clearly, up until this point, Captain America has only been hanging out with the Avengers, because this is the moment where he writes a letter to Colonel Nick Fury in the Pentagon in Washington and says, you won't remember me, but we met in combat during the war, exclamation point. I'm anxious to get back into harness again. and I've heard that you are engaged in important counter-espionage for the Army. So Cap, this is the first time that Cap is approaching Nick Fury to try to what would ultimately end up working with S.H.I.E.L.D. as well as the Avengers, right? Because that was something I always found interesting about Captain America, was that he seemed to be connected to the Avengers and to S.H.I.E.L.D. And this must be where, and I knew the Avengers were the ones that rescued him, found him in the ice. So this must be where he first begins to make that connection with Nick Fury and get involved with S.H.I.E.L.D. Now he goes to mail the letter, and this is just too perfect, right? I love it. I love it, love it, love it. Steve goes to mail the letter, and as he happens to look up at a car driving by, and in the back seat, he recognizes the Enchantress and the Executioner. So if they had gone down a different street or worn disguises or anything, or he had not mailed the letter that minute, if he'd waited, gone and gotten a cup of coffee and then mailed the letter, this would have been a different story. All right, so Cap tries to follow them, and the Enchantress sees him and makes the cable that he was on, the traffic light cable, fall. So they get back to where they're going, an imperially furnished private building in the heart of the city. And the Enchantress and the Executioner are having their usual banter, and then Zemo shows up and makes sure they know what they're supposed to do. And then Cap calls an emergency meeting of the Avengers because he's seen the Enchantress and the Executioner. Again, it would have been funny if it had just been a couple of people in like Halloween costumes or something. You know, they were on their way to Comic-Con dressed like the Enchantress and the Executioner. Cap calls an emergency Avengers meeting because of cosplay. That would be pretty good. But no, he's right, because Zemo chooses that moment to abduct Rick Jones. I guess to use as bait to get Captain America to follow him. He drops a bomb on Iron Man and Thor, which, okay. And this is one of those things I've been trying to figure out. I'll stare at these things for 5 minutes trying to understand. So Rick is kidnapped, but Giant Man catches Thor and Iron Man. Okay. And they were, the bomb. Yeah. And then Giant Man borrows Cap's shield and throws it, but it bounces off the vehicle. So where did it go? It wasn't Cap throwing it, so it wasn't thrown just perfectly to come back or whatever, like he's so good at. So, and it's way, way up in the air because Giant Man had to throw it. So it really makes me wonder, did they take a quick detour across Manhattan to track down where the shield landed? And what if some kid got it and ran off with it? I don't know that I would have let Giant Man throw my shield if I were Cap. Throw it like a freaking, into orbit almost. Yeah, so there's Rick Jones held captive. The Wasp sneaks aboard. And then the Avengers are trying to figure out what to do. They need transportation. Man, do we ever, in these last few issues, do we ever see the reason that they have the Quinjets, right? Because whenever they need to go somewhere besides across town, it's always this big logistical problem for them. So Iron Man calls up, like, I guess NASA or the Air Force, and he has apparently a rotary phone dial built around his chest beam. That's cool. And he calls up urgent by authorization of Anthony Stark. Well, prove it. You can't. I don't know that you have any connection to Anthony Stark. On the other end of the line, I hereby order the immediate dispatch of the XL-750 rocket plane. Now, the next time we see the rocket plane in the Avengers are aboard the rocket plane. So did they send a pilot with it, or did it come by like remote control or autopilot? I don't know. It's not clear. By the way, this occurred to me several times during this issue, and it's not the first time. And I wanted to say something about this. I am a firm believer overall that the mighty Marvel method of doing comics, right, where the the writer and the artist together, or the writer or the artist, depending on who you believe, right, comes up with a general plot, and then they draw it, and then the writer comes back and scripts the actual dialogue and captions to have it make sense and to flow properly. And I think that most of the time that's a really good idea, because I think that it's usually, as a comic book writer myself, my experience is that it's better to let an artist use his or her own skills and judgment and knowledge to draw an issue the way that they think it should look visually, and then the writer go back and adapt the scripting to fit those pages. To me, generally, that works better than creating a hard and fast script and telling the artist, you must draw everything the way I've described it here in this script. Because when the writer is in charge of doing that, you're taking the visual dynamic away from the person who's a visual artist and giving it to somebody who's a word slinger. And I've done it both ways, and I generally encourage artists. I say, this is what needs to happen, but if you come up with a better way of this looking, I'll redo it to match. You know, I certainly did that with the Pulsar comic book a few months ago. I wrote a full script, and when Jennifer Stolzer drew it, she drew what she knew would work the best as an artist, as a visual artist. And I then went back and rewrote the script for the letterer based on what she actually drew. Because if she had to force herself to conform to my literal descriptions, panel to panel, it would have hurt the visual appeal of the comic, right? Comics are primarily a visual medium. As much as Stan tries to squeeze War and Peace text-wise into every issue, and he does, they're primarily a visual medium. And I feel like the artist needs to have the say as far as how things look. But what I'm getting at, though, is that this is one of those exceptions where if the artist is not making things clear enough, and to me, back with these early issues, honestly, and I think I've alluded to this a few times along the way, but to me, the problem is that they try to squeeze too much story into too few pages of a comic book. And so Stan, you know, let me back up. The artist has to get so much in that they end up drawing all these little tiny panels. But then when they draw these little tiny panels, they still can't have the story make sense visually. So Stan has to then come in and give us all this exposition to tie everything together and explain what we're seeing, so that what we end up with is lots of little panels to try to tell the whole story. And those little panels are all filled with 8 tons of word. There are more letters, there are more words on these 2 pages here, pages 9 and 10, if you're following along at home and not able to see it. On pages 9 and 10 of this issue, there are probably more words than there were in any typical issue of Heroes Reborn Avengers from front to back. If you took all the words out of a Heroes Reborn Avengers from the late 90s, it probably was not this many words as on these 2 pages. So I don't dislike having a lot of words in a comic necessarily. I just feel like, again, this is a case where one problem causes another. You're trying to put too much story in, which means you have to cram things in too many panels, which makes the panels too small, and you still can't get across what you're trying to get across. So then the scripter has to come in and explain it with you know, boxes like these yellow expository boxes, and then the captions, and then the A lot of dialogue, people talking about things that are happening right, right. And you shouldn't need a character explaining what they're doing as we're watching them do it. That's redundant. And yet it happens over and over and over in these issues. So I don't know that I necessarily blame Stan or Jack or Don Heck or whoever, but clearly it's going to have to evolve. And I think it does pretty quickly. Pretty soon we're going to be into issues that don't have that problem as much. I think Roy Thomas still did it a good bit, but by that point, it was all getting better. I'm just going to say it was getting better because I don't want to say it was anybody's fault. All right. The Black Knight and the Melter in prison. Here's another example, right? So the artist draws the Black Knight and the Melter in prison in their costumes. So the scripter has to say, we were allowed to keep our armored costumes because a scientific delegation from Washington is on the way to study us, and we've no way to stop them. There's absolutely no reason at all why that word balloon at all should be in this comic book other than that it was drawn that way, and then Stan realized, why are they in prison in their armored costumes? Why haven't they been stripped down to prison fatigues, right? Well, it must be because they're going to be studied, and so they need them in their costumes. So you see what I mean? This is, again, another case of the artist must have drawn them in their costumes without even thinking, probably. Either Jack or Don Heck. And so Stan has to explain it. Why else is that even there? And then they're broken out by the other Masters of Evil. Gets his horse back, yay. And they're ready to go fight the Avengers. Black Knight shoots some kind of saw blade revolving thing, and it spins around the plane. By the way, we get this a lot in this issue. In the name of the Avengers, says Thor. And it kind of looks like that picture of Thor on page 11 when he's flying up and says, in the name of the Avengers. It looks a lot like the Led Zeppelin Swan Song logo. But this is a good probably 8, 9, 10 years before Led Zeppelin came out with Swan Song. So that's what it looks like. So he says that a lot, in the name of the Avengers, in this issue. He destroys the blade, I guess. He fights the Black Knight. We get into just a big battle sequence here that, when I was 9, I probably would have thought was really cool. But now I'm just like, okay, let's, if you do something interesting with it, I'm all for it. But they just kind of trade zaps. He does have a transistor force ray rather than his repulsors here, Iron Man. So that's interesting. And he's fighting the Melter, who drops a water tower on him. But Iron Man says, I'm surprised at you, fella. These power transistors of mine aren't here for show. So again, he's all big on, Iron Man was all hipped up on transistors back then. As Luke Smith might say, maybe this is the influence of Big Transistor on their on the comic back then. So again, more fighting. The ship's not moving. The aircraft. Giant Man jumps out. Wasp pours some grease under Scourge, and he falls down. Enchantress zaps Jan. It's just some battles going back and forth here. But meanwhile, Captain America, still flying the plane, realizes Zemo must be behind the attack, and that's why he kidnapped Rick Jones. So Cap's going to fly off to Central America or South America in the not a Quinjet. And Zemo, of course, has secret hidden sensors in the grass and the jungle. Oh, and Zemo gets classic Stan Lee dialogue. What are you waiting for, you fool? You know my orders. Bring him down. Bring him down. He must not escape me again. Zemo gets Stan loved writing the dialogue of Nazis and former Nazis. The Red Skull, Dr. Doom might as well be. Zemo, they all get such great dialogue. So Rick is trapped in some kind of a bubble, but he's freed by the rockets that Captain America is shooting. We still only have boys selling grits. I'm sorry, girls, ladies, you can't sell newspapers. I don't know why. So Thor's chasing the Black Knight around town, and somehow Thor, a horse is able to get around this building, but Thor runs into it. Okay. Thor just runs slap into the building that a horse went over. All right, more battle, more battle. Melter is just a lame villain. I love that the Executioner and the Enchantress are escaping in a car. This is like a scene out of the 1970s Hammond Spider-Man TV show. That the villains jump in a car and are driving away, and the Giant Man stops them, and they're getting ready to fight again. I like that, of all people, Executioner tries a reverse psychology trick on Thor and says, "Hear me, Thor, you have vowed never to harm a mortal, but think of the scores of humans who will be injured if we fight here," basically. And Thor's like, hey, he's kind of right. Well, actually, Iron Man says that, and then Thor's like, no, he's just trying to trick us. And then I thought that maybe the Executioner would try to sell it a little bit more. No, I'm serious. You don't want to hurt these people. But he immediately gives up. All right. Stealth didn't work. I'll try something else. Oh, bless your heart, Scourge. You gave it an honest effort, even though you didn't really try to sell it. So Cap has his shield back, and he's rescuing Rick. And here comes Zemo and the Nazi Brigade. And this is where we get into that question I was asking at the beginning, because believe it or not, we're already to the last page. And I've said this over and over, and I apologize for saying these things over and over, but they keep happening. It's like they get to the last page and they realize, oh, it's the last page. We need to wrap this thing up. We need to finish the story, but we've only got this one last page to do it. So the shield that Cap threw bounces off the rocks. We've seen this trick a million times since then, but this is probably one of the first times he did it. So I'll be charitable and say this was a new idea back then, right? That Cap throws the shield, the villain laughs about it missing, and instead it hits something else. In this case, the rocks. So this is maybe this is surely one of the earlier times that Cap has done that, if not the first. So the rocks, and again, it would have made a nice panel to have one showing the rocks actually falling and separating Zemo from all of his minions. But instead, in one panel, the shield bounces off the rocks, doing no damage apparently whatsoever that we can see. And in the next panel, while the shield still hasn't come all the way back to Captain America, this is important in terms of the time frame here. In the second panel on this page, the last page, the shield still hasn't gotten all the way back to Captain America. So it's, we're less than a second here probably. And Zemo is cut off from his minions. The rocks are all there between him and them. It looks more like the shield hitting the rocks made them disappear, right? If you look at that panel on page 20, the last page, it looks like Cap throws the shield, it hits the rocks, and that makes Zemo's army of bad guys disappear. Now, because of that, I guess, Stan gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 word balloons in those two little panels explaining he missed. I wasn't aiming for you. I knew your disintegrator pistol could destroy my shield. I was aiming for a more vital target, and I hit it. I hit that one certain rock. I knew it. He's gone mad, says Zemo. No, you murderer, not mad, just skillful enough to hit the one rock which could cause the others to fall in such a way as to cut you off from your warriors. All right, he says all of that before he catches his shield. Okay. And then Zemo says, a waste of time. That cheap vaudeville trick cannot save you now. So, okay, a cheap vaudeville trick, but it was pretty effective. When he cut off, it separated Zemo from all of his men. He has to do the dirty work himself. So now he brings up his disintegrator gun, and he actually says, and thus dies Captain America. And then Cap angles his shield so that the sun bounces off of it. Okay. and that blinds Zemo, and he can't shoot. And then he accidentally does shoot straight up or to the side, and all the rocks come down. And Rick yells, "Cap, look out." Cap says, "Don't worry, Rick, my shield will save me, but nothing can save the master of villainy. You can rest easier now, Bucky, wherever you may be. I actually thought he was talking to Rick there for a second, but he's talking to the ghost of Bucky. And yes, I know in some ways Rick is the ghost of Bucky. But no, he means like the literal memory of Bucky. Cap says, "You can rest easier now, Bucky, wherever you may be. Your death has been avenged." And then the last panel, and this gets to the title, the first panel and the last panel of this story: "No man can perpetrate evil without paying the price. If destiny could speak, it would say, quote, 'By my hand shall always die a villain,' unquote." Now, I remind you of the questions I was asking on the splash page a few moments ago. What does that mean? Is Captain America saying, I'm going to just start killing bad villains? If destiny could speak, it would say, "By my hand shall always die a villain." By my hand shall always die a villain. That's speaking of the future, meaning I'm going to kill villains in the future. But that's not what Cap does. It's not what he's ever done, and it's not what he does after this. So I just don't understand it. I mean, it certainly applies here, but even here, it wasn't by his hand. It was by Zemo's. Zemo shot the rocks and dropped them on himself. I mean, I think if destiny could speak, it would say, "By his own hand shall always die a villain." That's a better line, isn't it? By his own hand shall always die a villain. He brings it about himself through his villainy and through his incompetence there at shooting the rocks instead of shooting Captain America. So I think by my own hand, by his own hand shall always die a villain. Or by my hand shall I die if I'm a villain. I don't love that phrasing. I don't understand it. All right. Well, I look forward to your thoughts on it. We do get the end here, which is strange because the next issue picks right back up at this point. It's part 2, as we will see soon when we talk about The Old Order Changeth, number 16. But after saying the end, there's a caption that says, "But though Zemo shall menace mankind no more," oh, the Thunderbolt's wish, "the most spectacular battle of all time." I know it's the difference, Zemo, save your letters. "The most spectacular battle of all time awaits the Avengers in New York, and the outcome of that battle shall bring a change in the lineup of the Avengers, as you will see and marvel at next issue." So this is the end, I guess, for now. But some big thing is coming in the next issue, and we know that that's certainly the case. All right, so I'm very curious. I would love to know your thoughts on what I've talked about in this issue. I looked through the letters page. I didn't see anything of note. Thor is up to issue 115, fighting the Absorbing Man, which is cool. Daredevil number 7. Spider-Man number 24. I guess that's Amazing Spider-Man. And Fantastic Four number 38. All right. There is something here about the next issue down in the bottom corner. I haven't even read it before, so I'm going to move it over here where I can see it. I can't see it at all there. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to make it. I'm going to zoom in. Y'all bear with me just a second so I can zoom in and read this. Okay, here we go. Our next and most important announcement is a tough one to write now because we haven't worked out all the final details of it yet. However, we want to let you know, we want to let you in on what we're planning so far for our next ish. I'm having a hard time reading this. It's very splotchy. Avengers 16 will be a very special mag. There are going to be some big changes made in the lineup of heroes who now make up our roster. Some will drop out, some will remain, and new ones will be added. That's all we can tell you now. But remember, if you miss number 16, it'll take you months to figure out what's going on when you get the following issues. Oh, okay. So reserve your copy now. I'm not sure how you do that. I was never able to reserve a copy of anything from Marvel when all the years I read them. And be with us next month for one of the most surprising, daringly different, offbeat issues ever published. Become a part of history. Don't fail to answer when the proud cry rings out, Avengers Assemble. So, it's true. I mean, the funny thing is, this issue we've just reviewed is not one that, contrary to Stan's admonition at the beginning, this is not one that we would treasure for years, I don't think. But it certainly leads to one that would be treasured for years and is still considered a milestone in the history of the Avengers. So there we go. Avengers 15, now by my hand shall die a villain. I don't understand the title. I don't understand why Cap said that. Oh, and the last thing I was going to say, talking about number 16, is I suspect that Stan and Jack were just starting to get bored, and I don't blame them, but get bored with the same story almost every month, which is some villain wants to destroy the Avengers. They get together, fly to some location. There's a battle. Somebody's held captive, somebody's rescued, and they wrap it all up in about 9 panels on the last page. That's been pretty much, and, you know, Rick Jones kind of orbits around a little bit, Zemo kind of orbits. I mean, when we lost Hulk and Submariner, we lost like the main subplot of the first several issues of the book. So by Avengers 15, it really has sort of devolved down to the Avengers in a big battle with some other villains, and somebody's life is threatened. Maybe it's the villain, maybe it's one of the heroes. But it's just kind of gotten into a stale, repetitive cycle. And I think that Stan and Jack were very wise to say, let's shake things up, right? Let's bring in some characters that, while they may not be Earth's mightiest heroes, they're all of about a similar power level at that point in their careers. I mean, certainly today we would say that the Scarlet Witch is way more powerful than you know, some of them, obviously. But at the time, they were all just sort of about on the same level, more or less. And that seemed to work better because it had to have been a challenge to write a comic book that had Thor on the one hand, Iron Man, and then on the other hand, Giant Man, and then the Wasp, when you're determined to depower Hank, but especially to depower Jan. So in response to that, they just give us new characters so that they're all more evenly matched. All right. So join me and my special guests coming up in just a couple of weeks. We will look at Avengers 16 when the whole big shooting match changes. All right. I guess we're going to get on out of here for another episode. Again, go to www.avengersassemble.net if you want to become a patron and come in on the join in on the fun. I'm going to be posting some more episodes just for the patrons there. And otherwise, for another month, another 2 weeks, whatever, Avengers Assemble.